Some celebrity stories become famous because of a movie, a championship, or a hit television show. Others become unforgettable because someone finally decides to live openly as who they are. For these public figures, that decision came with enormous attention. Some risked careers. Others faced family struggles, political debate, or years of misunderstanding. And one name on this list is here for a completely different reason. Because the internet invented a transgender story that was never true. Today, we're counting down 7 celebrity stories that change the conversation around gender identity. And number 1 proves why facts matter just as much as visibility. Carmen Carrera. Starting at number 7 is Carmen Carrera. Most viewers first discovered Carmen on season 3 of RuPaul's Drag Race. At the time, audiences primarily knew her as a drag performer. She was polished, confident, and immediately stood out for her beauty and stage presence. But after the show ended, Carmen's story moved far beyond drag. She publicly transitioned and began living openly as a transgender woman. That distinction became extremely important because many viewers at the time didn't fully understand the difference between drag and gender identity. Drag is a performance. For Carmen, being a woman was not. And once she began speaking openly about that difference, she also became more vocal about the way transgender people were discussed in entertainment. One major controversy came when Carmen criticized language used on RuPaul's Drag Race that she believed was disrespectful toward transgender women. The reaction was divided. Some people agreed that the language needed to change. Others argued that drag culture had always used provocative humor and shouldn't be restricted. Carmen didn't back away. She argued that visibility without respect wasn't enough, and that became one of the most important themes of her public life. Her career also continued to grow. She moved into modeling, appeared in fashion projects, and used her platform to advocate for transgender dignity. What makes Carmen's story significant is that her transition didn't simply change how people saw her. It forced audiences to understand that gender identity and performance are not the same thing. But number 6 faced a completely different risk. She had already built a successful career around an androgynous image. Transitioning meant potentially losing the very thing that made the fashion industry interested in her. Andreja Pejíc. At number 6 is Andreja Pejíc. Before publicly transitioning, Andreja had already achieved something rare in the fashion industry. Her androgynous appearance allowed her to model both menswear and women's wear. Designers were fascinated by the way she moved between traditional gender categories. That ambiguity became part of her professional identity, and for a while it made her career incredibly distinctive. But behind that success was a much more personal conflict. Andreja was born in Bosnia and Herzegovina and later moved with her family to Australia. Growing up, she felt drawn toward femininity and struggled with the gender role she had been assigned. As her modeling career expanded, those feelings didn't disappear. In some ways, success made the decision harder. The fashion industry had rewarded her for looking androgynous. Transitioning meant changing the exact image that had made her famous. There was no guarantee the opportunities would continue. According to Andreja's account, she spent years thinking carefully about what transition could mean for both her personal life and her career. Eventually, authenticity became more important than professional uncertainty. In 2014, she publicly announced her transition. And then something happened that could easily have gone the other way. Her career survived. More than that, she continued working successfully in fashion. Andreja became one of the most visible openly transgender models working internationally. That made her story especially powerful. She didn't transition because she had nothing to lose. She transitioned when she already had something valuable at risk. And she proved that the fashion industry could make room for a transgender woman without turning her identity into the end of her career. But number 5 faced a different kind of pressure. His family was already famous long before he had the chance to define himself. Chaz Bono. Number 5 is Chaz Bono. Growing up is difficult enough without millions of people already knowing your name. For Chaz, that was reality. He was born to Sonny Bono and Cher, two of the most recognizable entertainers in America. From childhood, his life was already public. The world knew him before he had the chance to fully understand himself. For years, Chaz struggled with the female identity others expected him to live. At first, he understood part of that discomfort through sexual orientation and came out as a lesbian. But over time, he realized that something deeper was happening. The issue wasn't only who he was attracted to, it was who he was. Around the late 2000s, Chaz began his gender transition. The process included hormone therapy, medical care, and major emotional adjustment. His transition later became the subject of the documentary Becoming Chaz, allowing audiences to see a deeply personal process unfold under extraordinary public attention. But one of the most revealing parts of the story involved Cher. She has spoken openly about needing time to adjust. That honesty mattered. Because support doesn't always mean instant understanding. For some families, acceptance is a process. Cher's public comments showed that love and adjustment can exist at the same time. Chaz eventually continued working in entertainment and became a much more visible transgender man in mainstream American media. His story helped many viewers understand that transition in adulthood isn't about becoming a different person. For Chaz, it was about finally living in a way that matched the person he had understood himself to be. But number 4 pushed the conversation into a much more controversial arena: professional combat sports. Fallon Fox. At number 4 is Fallon Fox, and her story became controversial almost the moment the broader public discovered it. Fallon grew up in Ohio and has described experiencing discomfort with her assigned gender from an early age. But at the time, there was far less public understanding of transgender identity. When she tried to explain what she was feeling to her family, the response was difficult. According to the account in the source material, her father interpreted her feelings through the lens of sexual orientation, and Fallon faced attempts to suppress or change them. For years, she continued living publicly as male. She served in the United States Navy. She later pursued other professional goals. But eventually, the strain of hiding became too much. As an adult, Fallon transitioned. Then came the decision that made her nationally known. She entered professional mixed martial arts. In 2013, Fallon became the first openly transgender woman to compete professionally in MMA. And almost immediately, the conversation stopped being only about her personal story. It became about sports. Critics raised questions about physical advantages and competitive fairness. Supporters argued that Fallon met the regulatory requirements that existed at the time and should be allowed to compete. The debate became intense and often personal. Every fight seemed to carry more cultural weight than an ordinary sporting event. That's what makes Fallon's story so important. Her career forced athletic organizations, commentators, and fans to confront questions that remain controversial today. How should inclusion work in physically demanding sports? What standards should governing bodies use? And how should those rules evolve? Fallon didn't resolve those questions, but she made them impossible to ignore. Number 3 created a very different kind of cultural moment, because this time, the transition came from an Oscar-nominated actor millions already knew. Elliot Page. Elliot Page number 3 is Elliot Page. By the time Elliot publicly came out as transgender, audiences had already watched his career for years. Juno made him internationally recognizable and earned him an Academy Award nomination. He continued working in major films and television projects, building a reputation as a serious and highly respected actor. But behind that success, Elliot later described a much more difficult personal experience. The public identity attached to his career didn't fully reflect who he understood himself to be. and carrying that disconnect became increasingly exhausting. Hollywood also added another layer of pressure. Actors are constantly photographed, styled, promoted, interviewed. Their appearance becomes part of the product. For someone struggling with gender identity, that level of visibility can make private discomfort almost impossible to escape. Then, in December 2020, Elliot shared a public statement announcing that he is transgender. The message was personal and direct. For many fans, it was unexpected. For Elliot, it represented the opposite. It was the result of something he had been processing privately for years. After coming out, he spoke about feeling greater peace and clarity. And then the Umbrella Academy made an important creative decision. Elliot's character transitioned as well, becoming Victor Hargreaves. Rather than removing Elliot from the role or pretending nothing had changed, the series incorporated the transition into the story. That gave mainstream audiences a rare example of a transgender actor continuing in a major established role. And that's what makes Elliot's journey especially significant. He didn't disappear from Hollywood after coming out. He remained visible. But number 2 became part of an even larger media event. Her transition was introduced to millions of people at almost the exact same time. Caitlyn Jenner. At number 2 is Caitlyn Jenner. Before 2015, the public knew a completely different image. Bruce Jenner was an Olympic champion. After winning the decathlon at the 1976 Montreal Games, Jenner became a symbol of athletic strength and American success. Later came television, family fame, and eventually, keeping up with the Kardashians. But Caitlyn has said that behind that extremely public image was a private conflict that stretched back decades. She described experiencing questions about her gender identity from a young age. During the late 1980s, she even explored transition privately and used hormone therapy for a period. But she stopped. Why? Fear. Fear of what it could mean for her family, fear of losing her public life, fear of what people would say. So the world continued seeing one version of Jenner while the internal struggle remained hidden. Then, decades later, the balance changed. In 2015, Caitlyn publicly discussed her gender identity in a highly watched television interview. Soon afterward came the Vanity Fair cover introducing Caitlyn to the world. The reaction was immediate. Supporters celebrated the visibility. Critics challenged everything from her public image to her politics and personal history. But regardless of opinion, the cultural impact was enormous. Millions of Americans, who may never have knowingly followed the story of a transgender person, were suddenly watching one unfold in real time. That's why Caitlyn belongs near the top. Her story wasn't important simply because she was famous. It was important because she had been famous for decades before coming out. The contrast between those two public identities made the story impossible to ignore. But number 1 is completely different. Because there was no transition at all. There was only an internet rumor. Chanel West Coast. Taking the number 1 spot is Chanel West Coast. But not for the reason you might expect. Chanel is not transgender, and that fact is exactly why her story belongs here. For years, a bizarre internet rumor circulated claiming that Chanel West Coast and actor Lee Norris were somehow the same person. Lee Norris is best known to many viewers as Stuart Minkus from Boy Meets World. Chanel became famous through MTV, music, and reality television. They are two completely separate people. They have separate careers, separate histories, separate lives. And yet, online users began comparing photographs and claiming that Lee had transitioned and later became Chanel West Coast. There was no factual basis for it. Still, the rumor spread. Some people repeated it as a joke. Others apparently believed it. And eventually, Chanel had to address speculation built entirely around strangers deciding two celebrities looked similar. That's what makes this story such an important ending. Everything else in this countdown involves people telling the public who they are. Chanel's case shows what happens when the public decides to invent an identity for someone instead. And that difference matters. Transgender identity isn't a punchline. It isn't something that should be assigned to a celebrity because two photographs look vaguely alike, and it shouldn't be treated as an internet mystery for strangers to solve. Chanel's story reveals the darker side of celebrity speculation. Once a rumor is repeated enough times, people stop asking where it came from. Then fiction begins to look like fact, and that's exactly why accuracy matters in conversations about identity. Because visibility can create understanding. Misinformation does the opposite. These 7 stories reveal very different sides of the same conversation. Some people risked careers to live openly. Others helped change television, fashion, family conversations, or sports. And one false rumor showed how easily identity can be turned into online entertainment. Which story surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more celebrity stories that separate the real history from the rumors, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for the next video.